The first of the Magi stared down at the thing in his hand, his eyes growing wider and wider.
This is not it,
he whispered, his lip trembling.
This is just a stone. In a more traditional epic fantasy, or even the standard sword and sorcerer's affair, the final chapter of Before They Are Hanged, entitled The Abode of Stones, would have played out very differently. Here would have marked the turning point in our heroes' journeys. This would have been the triumphant claiming of the magical stone forsworn to them by destiny. It would have given them access to near godlike power, granting them the ability to travel homeward, defeat their enemies, and save the world. That is, if their journey had contained any meaning. Instead, we see something wholly different. While the Abode of Stones was certainly a turning point, it was hardly triumphant. It gave our heroes nothing, save for a rock and an overarching feeling of emptiness, and in fact, made their enemies all the more likely to succeed. Why? Because these are not heroes. Their journey is not noble, and this is not your typical fantasy tale. Nothing is as it seems at the outset. Hello everyone, it is Tuesday, I am Tuesday, and today we're going to be talking about Before They Are Hanged by Joe Abercrombie, Book 2 of the First Law Trilogy. While viewing my previous video on the trilogy isn't required for context on this one, reading the first 2 books certainly is if you are of a mind to avoid spoilers, as the opening of the video might tell you. This is the second episode in my Bookshelf A to Z series, in which I analyze every book on my bookshelf in this picture. It's going to be a slog, and I'll probably lose my marbles at least twice before it's over, but hey, that's show business. If you'd like to see more of that, or anything else relating to books, movies, and television, like the video and subscribe to get updated on future installments. Now, what was I talking about again? Oh, yeah, how Logan and friends are gonna use a magical MacGuffin to save the world. In a traditional epic fantasy trilogy, the reader might expect the overarching plot of the book to look a little something like this. Book 1. Planting. Anything major that's going to be paid off in the third novel ought to be teased here. Otherwise, we're going to be introduced to the characters and the world, while also providing enough intrigue to move us forward into Book 2. Progress. This whole novel is about moving forward. In it, the characters grow and adapt as people, while also passing concrete markers towards the victory that they hope to achieve at the end of Book 3. The whole idea is that they grow with the story, so that by the time they have everything they need in order to defeat the big bad, they have also become the types of people who will be able to effectively use the power that they have attained. This, of course, leads to Book 3, Payoff. Here, time is running out. The forces of evil have amassed their armies, and the fires of hell are about to be let loose upon the realm. There is a point in this novel where everything will look bleak, maybe even a couple of times, until the heroes are able to pull themselves together in order to defeat the forces of darkness once and for all. Sounds kinda badass, right? Well, you've got a few thousand years of human history to agree with you, along with Joe Abercrombie himself to a certain degree. When looking back on the Blade itself, it's pretty obvious that the novel is towing the overarching trilogy line, and when looking forward to Last Argument of Kings, it feels like that novel is going to go along in a similar manner. Which is why I'm so intrigued by Before They Are Hanged. Because outside of the 2 rather major character personality alterations, nothing really happens. Don't get me wrong, things occur in the story, it's just that their occurrence feels circular in its execution. For example, let's take a look at everybody's favorite diabolical inquisitor, Sand Dan Glocta. Despite spending the novel lording over the city of Dagaska, killing his enemies, unearthing lore tidbits, fending off invasions, and other such tomfoolery, when everything is said and done, he finds himself in exactly the same spot he was when he started out from Adwa. At the beginning of the novel, good old Colonel Sand here exists in a state of ignorance. His domain, the city of Dagaska, is about to fall to Gurkish forces, and Glokta doesn't even have an inkling into what the lenders are doing to influence the government. He spends most of the novel rooting out corruption while also taking his own bribes, as you do, and taking every opportunity available to stay fanatically stagnant in his worldview. There is one moment where he seems to break from his hardline approach to justice, but that decision feels internally consistent with his character based on actions we've previously seen him take in the narrative. I'm getting out into the reads though, so what I mean to say is this. Would you like to guess what Glokta is doing once the novel reaches its end? In a story as hefty as this one, the reader might expect one of the 4 major point of view characters to at least advance the plot somehow. The character doesn't have to change, Lord knows Glokta doesn't in this novel, but you and I would normally expect to see that character make significant narrative progress in order to counterbalance their lack of personal growth. Instead, when it comes to Glokta, we're left with this, and he isn't even the outlier. Take a look at Logan. Yeah, he takes on a leadership role near the middle of the novel in order to keep the journey running smoothly, but he gives up the power as soon as he can and hardly changes as a result of having held it. Calling this an example of dynamic internal development would represent a fundamental misunderstanding of Logan's character. His actions are not those of someone stepping out of their shell to try something new, but rather act as a reinforcement of the person he already was by using skills he already had in order to achieve results he already knew how to handle. Leading a warband is Logan's average state of being, especially leading one as disparate as the recruits of the Magus. It would be weird if he didn't take the job, quite frankly. The only one of the big 3 from my last video to undergo any significant change is Jezel, and it took him literally almost dying in a duel in order for that to happen. So what the hell is going on here? Well, it mainly has to do with the audience's expectations, and that the majority of people on their first read-through won't come to the epiphany that subversion is the point. I know. Anybody who's into literary analysis would have seen this coming from a mile away. It's Abercrombie, dude. He's the poster child for grimdark fantasy. Of course there was going to be trope subversion. But for the people who might not have noticed this yet, consider this. What do you do with an absolute douche canoe of a lordling while out for a picnic with your typical fantasy affair? Maybe you have him arrogantly charge into a battle he cannot possibly win, getting the majority of his army killed as a result. Fortunately, our lordling will survive this encounter, albeit just barely. A significant but non-mortal wound could be thrown in for good measure. Just look at Jezel. But it isn't necessary for the type of character development that we're going for. What is necessary is that our lordling must spend some time roughing it. Maybe he gets taken prisoner and has to escape. Maybe he stumbles upon and is taken in by a secluded family of goat farmers who help to teach him the value of humility. Or maybe he gets saved from the slaughter by one of his loyal soldiers and must trek through the backwoods to safety, all the while realizing what war and hardship really mean to the average serf or soldier. It doesn't really matter what the circumstances of the roughing it portion of the story are. All that matters is that the hardships endured during that portion of the story are able to transform our darling douche canoe into a cognizant and caring lord, someone who deserves the despotic levels of power that they are inevitably going to inherit. Now, remember that Joe Abercrombie was the one who wrote this story. What do you think is going to happen to the arrogant prince in this version? Was it spend all his time being an incredibly large piece of human dog shit before attempting to, let's say Team Rocket? The only girl in his traveling party, leading to him being thrown off of a cliff to his death by the very man who dragged him from the battlefields to save him? Because if so, then you would be correct. The whole book is full of this stuff. The stone isn't real. None of our characters rise through the military ranks on the backs of their pure strategic genius. Nobody gains any stupid strong magic. Logan might kill all of his friends while in a blood frenzy. Again. Glokta doesn't use any Eastern/Southern esotericism to alter his worldview or even change his political standing at home. Only one person undergoes a redemption arc, and they still act like a codswallop after having done so. My least favorite trope, in which two characters take a sip of the stupid juice and spend the rest of the novel fighting as opposed to having a 2-minute conversation, is set up, and then gets resolved off-screen. Hell, with all this trope subversion going on, I'm starting to think that Bayaz might turn out to be evil. Wait, did I bring that up too early? Oh, son of a bitch. No. We're talking about this now. This is the new title card. I jumped the gun, and this is what we're going with. Post-time skip theory rant. Here we go. I just want to remind everyone that I haven't read the third book yet. This is just a theory. Don't spoil anything in the comments. I think it's been hinted at pretty heavily that Bayaz is the real source of evil behind most of what's going wrong with the world, which would fit wonderfully with the overarching through-line of subversion that Abercrombie has been playing around with. The Magus likes to present himself as the sole rational actor, trying to keep a chaotic world from crumbling. But even as early as the end of the first novel, we can already see cracks beginning to form in his persona. It should be obvious to anyone who's read these novels that Bayaz is standoffish with his fellow mages, even at the best of times. While never outright lying, he isn't above twisting truth, perception, or even probability in order to meet his own ends. I think the moment that really tipped me off to Bayaz's internal instability was at the end of the first novel, when he exploderates a prefect sent to capture Logan. There's no warning to this violence, it kinda just happens. Sure, some dude getting transfigured into a fine red mist acts as the climax to an extended chase/battle sequence, but consider what that scene felt like from Bayaz's point of view. You're just chilling in the bath, and you hear a commotion out in the living room. You rush outside and are confronted with 3 secret police officers who insist one of you comes in for questioning. One of the officers steps forward, which is a fatal mistake because this man suddenly isn't. Boom, gone, dead as dead can be, broken up into a million little pieces and spread across the room in a fine flesh puree. I don't know about you, but in most stories, good people don't tend to vaporize a motherfucker when someone slightly annoys them. Well, you might be saying to yourself, that's just how this world is. Abercrombie is some of the quintessential grimdark fantasy of our time. Of course these characters aren't going to act like your regular upstanding protags. Just look at Logan. He kills people for fun when he's in a blood rage, and what about Glokta? The man tortures people for a living, and he's like the best out of any of them. How could you use this as an example that Bayaz is evil? And you're right. In a vacuum, this would seem like just another of the many minor violent subversions that take place across this series. But we don't live in a vacuum, now do we? If we did live in a vacuum, how would any of us be able to breathe, stupid? Instead, we're dealing with some highly pressurized deep space theory crafting here, and let me tell you, the evidence is rife to come to the conclusion that Bayaz may just be the greatest subversion of all. Dig out your particle board and red string, boys, and don't forget the tinfoil hats. It's conspiracy time. First of all, Bayaz has a super standoffish relationship with the other surviving Magi. Zacharias finds him rash in his search for the seed. Conile believes him to be two-faced after how he treated her and Ptolemy. Yulway only goes along with Bayaz's plans because he's been convinced that Khalul is the greater threat, and Khalul himself has taken over half of the known world in order to fight Bayaz head-on. We know this dweebus is hiding something about Cnetius' daughter Ptolemy. We know that he was the one to do Cnetius in, and we know that it was he who convinced Juvens to go to war with his brother after having initially betrayed the first son of Uz in order to study under the Master Maker. This dude is sketch, and at the very least, it is obvious that he suffers from being overly prideful. But is he evil? Well, have you ever heard the phrase, "the road to hell is paved with good intentions"? I think that deep down, Baez believes himself to be a good person. It's just that he believes himself to be better than literally everyone else in the world, as most villains do. Take, for example, why he went to learn from the Maker in the first place. Baez believed that Juvens was intentionally not teaching him things because Baez lacked ability. Not for safety reasons or anything like that. It was obviously personal. This couldn't stand because obviously Baez is so cool and talented and handsome and amazing. So this wizened ultra genius decided to do the sensible thing by throwing a temper tantrum and going to learn from someone else. Turns out, though, Canedius didn't teach him everything either. Not for safety reasons or anything, it was obviously personal. In response, Baez banged his new master's daughter, stole all the secrets anyway, and then went running back to Juvens while crying about how Canedius was breaking the rules. I have no doubt that Baez thought he was doing right when he left Juvens in search of a greater truth. I also have no doubt that he thought he was doing right when he informed Juvens of how Canedius was breaking the First Law.
Hey, that's the name of the show.
Despite it leading to the end of the Age of Magic. I have no doubt that Baez sees himself as the solution to all of the world's problems, despite the fact that he is indirectly responsible for, let's say, half of them that we know of so far. To that end, I would argue that Baez is not evil in that traditional Tolkien sense, but in a way that is much more nuanced. He exists as a holier-than-thou stain upon the wider world, filled with the type of unscrupulous, self-righteous smugness typical to the most tyrannical state apologists and evangelical religious zealots. Believing you are right and wanting to do good are far from evil traits, but believing you are always right, and capital K knowing that yours is the only way to do good, will only ever lead to damnation. Baez can fix whatever problems he desires, but so long as he remains rigid in his narcissistic beliefs, so long as he refuses to even entertain any outside perspectives, all he will do is create more problems in the future. This creates a self-fulfilling cycle in which Baez has to keep solving problems that arose as a result of unforeseen consequences from the last time Baez tried to solve anything. Baez's evil arises from an eternally deadly combination. The man has a fundamental inability to take opinions other than his own into consideration, no matter how reasonable they might be, and the raw, magical, and political power to effectively act upon his beliefs. Baez is always right and good, so everything he thinks must necessarily always be right and good. The Ring of the World has done nothing but suffer as a result.